Wendy Larson was standing at the end of my driveway when I turned the corner onto our street, and even from that distance, I could see that something was wrong. It was a Saturday morning in late September, that particular kind of autumn day we get in Minden. Sharp air, maple trees going orange above the lake road, wood smoke drifting from somewhere down the block. I had been at the farmer's market since 7, selling off the last of my meal prep containers and filling a full order of butter tarts for a woman in Halliburton who had been requesting them since August. My trunk was mostly empty now, just a collapsed cooler bag and my fold-up table, and I was thinking about nothing more serious than a shower and a cup of tea. Then I saw Wendy. She was standing at the end of my drive in her barn jacket, hands wrapped around a travel mug she clearly wasn't drinking from. Wendy is not the kind of woman who stands around waiting. She is 61 years old, has lived 3 houses down from us since before I moved to Minden, and operates on a tight personal schedule that runs like a transit map. If Wendy Larson was in my driveway at 9:30 on a Saturday, instead of deadheading her flower beds or making her weekly run to Peterborough, something had happened. I pulled in and cut the engine. The morning was very quiet except for the geese calling somewhere over the lake. "Sylvia," she said, and her voice had something careful in it. "Can we go inside?" She set her mug down on my porch railing and told me what she knew. Standing there in the pale September light with a cooler bag over one shoulder and my jacket still zipped to my chin, I felt something inside me go very, very still. The way the lake goes still in early morning before the wind picks up, flat and cold and absolutely clear. Let me back up, because none of what Wendy told me makes any sense without the before. And the before is a long story. 14 years of marriage long. My name is Sylvia Dunmore and I am 38 years old. I run a home-based catering and meal prep business out of my kitchen in Minden, Ontario. Minden is the kind of town where the same woman has run the post office for 23 years, and the diner on the main road still takes cash only and has a handwritten sign in the window about it. Population just over 500 in winter, 3 times that in summer when the cottagers flood in from Toronto and Mississauga. I have lived here for 15 years. I came up from Kingston to spend a weekend at a friend's camp, and I never quite left. My business is called Sylvia's Table. It started as weekend baking, muffins and pies sold from a folding table at the Saturday market, and it grew, slowly, into something that pays its own bills. I do corporate meal prep delivery to the work-from-home crowd, seasonal baking orders, small event catering for retirement parties and baby showers, a standing bi-weekly order of perogies for a family in Carnarvon who have been buying from me for 4 years without missing a single pickup. My commercial mixer is a 12-quart KitchenAid that I saved toward for 14 months, and I love it the way some women love jewelry. That machine has kept this family solvent through at least 2 stretches I would rather not think about. My husband's name is Paul. Paul Dunmore, 42, senior estimator for a construction management firm in Barrie. He drives Highway 11 north, then cuts across on 26. 2 hours each way, 4 days a week, which means he is gone most of each weekday and home with the tired, uncommunicative quality of a man who has spent too many hours inside a car. We met when I was 24 and he was 28. He came to the Saturday market looking for something for his mother and bought a lemon loaf and asked if I had a card. I gave him one. He called the next day. We were married in October 2010. Small ceremony at the Minden Wild Arts Festival grounds because it was beautiful and because neither of us had family money to throw at a big venue. Paul's mother, Doris, wore gray and stood at the edge of the photographs with the expression of someone who has been handed a form she hasn't quite agreed to sign. Doris. I need you to understand, Doris, before any of the rest of this makes sense. Doris Dunmore is 71 years old and lives in a tidy semi-detached in Bracebridge, 40 minutes north of Minden. She is a small woman, precise in everything she does, with silver hair, always cut the same way, and a habit of asking questions that are not actually questions. She was widowed when Paul was in his mid-20s, which she references as frequently as a credential. She raised Paul and his brother Gareth largely on her own after her husband's health failed. This is true. She also appears to have concluded that this sacrifice entitles her to a standing seat at every decision Paul has made since. From the beginning, Doris did not think I was enough. I was a girl from Kingston with a market table and no property and no professional degree. She had wanted Paul to stay with a woman named Sandra, who had grown up in Bracebridge and whose family owned a pair of rental properties outside of Gravenhurst. Sandra moved to Ottawa within a year of Paul and me getting together, but Doris kept a framed photo of her on the living room sideboard until I stopped noticing it, which is its own kind of statement. The first years I told myself it was just how some mothers-in-law were. She criticized my preserves at Thanksgiving. She told Paul his dress shirts needed better pressing, ignoring that I pressed every single one of them. She called our house small when we bought it, even though it was a 3-bedroom on a double lot 2 streets from the water, which is not a small thing in Haliburton County. When Paul and I talked about renovating the kitchen, she told him he ought to be careful about spending money he didn't have, which was her way of saying she would have an opinion about the spending before it happened. What I didn't understand until much later was how literally she meant that. It started around year 4. Paul's father had left a small life insurance payout when he passed. Doris had always been vague about the exact amount, somewhere in the range of $70,000, and Doris had kept control of it, releasing money to Paul in what she called help whenever she felt he'd earned it. The problem was that Doris decided what earned meant. And what it meant, I eventually came to understand, was that Paul needed to keep consulting her. He took $9,000 from her to replace the furnace and half the windows in our house the winter after we moved in. He took $6,000 in 2016 when a slow quarter at his firm left us short on the mortgage for 3 months running. Then another $4,000 in 2019 when a difficult year with my business meant our joint account was running closer to the limit than I could sleep easily with. Each time, Doris wrote it up on a piece of notepad paper. Not a proper loan agreement, not anything notarized, just a handwritten note that Paul signed. I found out about the third draw when Paul mentioned it at the kitchen table the same way he might have mentioned that we were low on propane. I set my fork down. "You didn't tell me you were going to her for money," I said. "It was faster," he said. "You know how long it takes to get a personal loan approved through the bank." "Paul, that is not the point. We're supposed to make these decisions together." He looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize. Not hostile. Just a kind of practiced, mild exhaustion, as if my having feelings about the thing was itself an inconvenience I was imposing on him. "It's sordid, Syl. Don't make a whole thing of it." That was 2019. I was 35 years old, had been married for 9 years, and "don't make a thing of it" was apparently the shape that partnership took in our house. We argued for 2 days. Paul called Doris. Doris called me directly, which she almost never did, to explain in her warmest voice that she only wanted to support her son, and that I should feel fortunate there was someone to catch them when things got tight. "Some of us," she said, "have learned to be practical about these things." I hung up and went back to my kitchen, and I filled a full order of 36 butter tarts for a retirement party in Haliburton, and my hands were steadier than my heart. But that has always been true. What I did not know then what I was still years from finding out, was that Doris's notepad notes were not the whole picture. The numbers were being tracked somewhere more carefully than scraps of paper. I didn't know that yet. The summer everything broke open was the summer Paul was 41 and I was 37, and a woman named Amber came into the shape of our lives. Amber worked in the accounting department at Paul's firm in Barrie. She was 30, and apparently they had been involved since the previous November, which placed the beginning of it around the same time Paul had taken up what he called a gym habit that had him leaving the house before 6 some mornings. I had noticed. I had told myself it was something men did when they started feeling their age. I had folded that thought away and not looked at it again. He told me about Amber on a Tuesday evening in February, standing at the kitchen island with his coat still on, like he hadn't decided whether he was staying. He was not leaving me, he said. He wanted to figure things out. There was something else. Amber was pregnant. I want to tell you, I threw something. I didn't. I sat very still in the chair by the window and looked out at the frozen lake at the end of the road and felt something inside me go completely quiet. Like the moment after a power failure, when every appliance stops at once and the silence is so total it almost has a sound. Their daughter, Ela, was born in April. Paul found Amber a rental above a garage in Huntsville, 45 minutes north of Minden, and he told me he was working out how to be present for the baby without blowing everything else apart. He said it the way he talked about complicated job timelines, as though it were a scheduling problem with a workable solution just around the corner. I am not going to pretend I understood my own reasons for staying through those months. I am 38 years old, and I cannot explain it without sounding like someone I no longer recognize. But there was something I was waiting to see. Some information not yet in. Some part of me that understood, below the level of language, that if I held still and watched carefully, the situation would eventually show me what it actually was. So I watched, and what I saw in those spring and summer months was that Paul was not managing two lives with any kind of intention or grace. He drove up to Huntsville on weekends. He came back quieter each time. He stopped saying Amber's name out loud. He started taking overnight work trips to Barrie on Tuesdays that had never existed before. And then it was September, and then Wendy was in my driveway. She sat at my kitchen table with her travel mug retrieved from the porch railing, and she talked for 40 minutes. Her sister, Bev, lived in Huntsville, 2 streets over from the rental where Amber had been staying. Wendy and Bev spoke every Sunday without fail. Last Thursday, Bev had called midweek, which she never did, to say that the unit above the garage had been emptied out. She had seen a truck Wednesday afternoon. The following morning, the landlord's son was overchanging the locks. Amber had packed up and left. Wendy had sat with this information for 4 days, trying to decide what to say and to whom. She knew the rough shape of things. Minden is 500 people in winter. The rough shape of things is rarely kept private for long. But she hadn't known how to walk up to my door with it. Then she saw Paul come home last Saturday. With flowers. He had pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon. I'd been out on a delivery and missed it entirely. And he'd gone inside carrying what Wendy described as a supermarket bouquet. Yellow and white. The kind you buy on impulse at the checkout near the door. I hadn't thought anything of those flowers at the time. They'd been sitting in a glass vase on the counter when I got home. Paul had said something vague about it being a hard week. I had said thank you and moved on. What I understood now, standing in my kitchen with Wendy across the table, was that those flowers had not been for me in any real sense. They were what you buy when you've been somewhere you shouldn't have been, and you want to look, when you walk back through your own front door like a man who buys flowers. Paul had driven to Huntsville that day. I would later find out he hadn't known yet that Amber was gone. He had arrived at the rental and found the unit locked, a note from the landlord taped to the door. He had driven home and stopped at the Freshco on the highway. I walked Wendy to the door around 10 that morning. She squeezed my hand at the porch step and said, quieter than she'd said anything else, "You deserve better than this, Seal, for what it's worth." I watched her walk back down the street past the maples that had gone fully orange overnight. The geese were still out over the water somewhere. The sky was a pale, cheerful blue that felt entirely wrong for what had just been said in my kitchen. I went inside. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the lower cabinets, and I let myself feel the full weight of 14 years. This is the part I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I sat on that floor and I cried until I couldn't anymore, and it wasn't for Paul, and it wasn't for myself in the simple way you might expect. I cried for the version of my life I had built entirely with my own hands. The version where Sylvia's table meant something beyond keeping the electricity on, where 14 years of early mornings and cold market Saturdays and bi-weekly peerages and 60 cents putter tarts added up to a marriage that held the shape I thought it held. I cried because Amber, a woman who had made her own complicated choices and whom I did not hate, not exactly, had apparently understood Paul more clearly than I had. She hadn't waited for him to make up his mind. She had packed up a one-bedroom apartment with a 6-month-old in a car seat and driven to wherever she had people, before he even knew she was gone. I was 38 years old, and I was sitting on my kitchen floor, and for the first time in a very long time, I could not see what the next step was. Paul came home that evening, and I said nothing about Wendy, nothing about Amber, nothing about Huntsville. I needed to think first. He sat at the island and ate the soup I'd made from market vegetables and told a story about something on the highway going north, and I listened and refilled my water glass twice and watched my husband not notice that everything in the room had already shifted. 4 days later, I called my daughter. Faye is 23 and lives in Toronto, working as a junior accountant at a firm downtown. She is the daughter I had from a relationship before Paul. Not a secret, just a part of my history that Paul had stepped into without ceremony and managed reasonably well until he didn't manage much of anything well anymore. Faye has Paul's last name on nothing. She figured out the architecture of our household with a clear eye by the time she was 16 and put appropriate distance between herself and Minden the week after her convocation. I do not blame her for that, not even a little. She picked up before the second ring. Mum, the way she said it, like she'd been expecting this call and had only been uncertain of the date, told me more than the word itself. I need to tell you some things, I said, and then I need you to tell me what you know about the money. A silence. What money? The notes, I said. The loans, the money Paul's been borrowing from his mother. A longer silence. I heard Faye exhale through her nose the way she did when she was thinking carefully about how much to say and in what order. Mum, she said finally, how much do you think there is? I don't know the number yet. That's part of why I'm calling. A beat, then, because you might know something I don't. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm coming up this weekend. Don't say anything to Paul before then. Don't go looking through any financial documents in the house on your own. And, Mum, do you have a bank account that's just yours? Not the joint account. Not the Sylvia's Table business account. The Sylvia's Table business account was technically in my name, but Paul had signing authority on it. Something we had set up in case of emergency, years ago, without thinking carefully about what it meant to have done that. I had nothing that was truly only mine. "Okay," Faye said, and her voice had shifted into something I had not heard from her in quite that way before. Focused and precise, a little cool in the way that competent people get cool when they are preparing to move. "Okay. Monday morning, first thing, go to the TD in Halliburton and open a personal checking account in your name only. Take cash from whatever you have on hand from the market. Just establish it. Then don't touch anything else until I'm there." I had the phone pressed to my ear in the kitchen, watching the back of Paul's truck through the window. He was in the garage. I could hear him out there. "Tell me what you know," I said, fast. And Faye told me. What she told me in the next few minutes was this. 2 Christmases ago, when she had driven up from Toronto for the holiday, she had been at Doris's house in Bracebridge for Christmas Eve dinner. She had offered to help set the table and gone looking in the sideboard for the good napkins. She had opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a blue binder. The kind with a clear sleeve on the cover and color-coded tabbed dividers. The kind a meticulous person keeps when she wants something to look official. Doris had come into the dining room and closed the drawer with one hand, smooth and deliberate, without saying a word. Faye had seen 3 pages before it closed. The binder was a ledger. Every draw Paul had taken from his mother, going back to at least 2012. Columns for date, amount, stated purpose, running balance, and, because Doris had apparently decided this on her own without consulting anyone, interest. 5% per annum, compounding annually. The current balance tab, which Faye had read clearly before the drawer closed, was $61,200. I heard Paul's truck door slam in the garage. I had maybe a minute. "Does he know the full number?" I said. "I don't think he knows the full number. I think she shows him pieces. Enough to keep him feeling like he owes her something. Not enough to let him actually sit down and do the math." "Drive up," I said. "Don't call first." I set the phone down on the counter just as Paul came through the side door and hung his keys on the hook by the door. I was standing at my mixer with a spatula in my hand, perfectly composed, the way you learn to be composed over 14 years of practice. "Long day?" he said. "Always," I said. Faye arrived that Friday, 9 days later, in her own car, a used Corolla she had bought for herself and finished paying off last spring. She brought 2 things I hadn't asked for: a folder of printed notes and a woman named Catherine Mwende, who was a licensed paralegal at a family law firm in Toronto and had been Faye's university roommate. Catherine was 36, lean and careful, with reading glasses on a lanyard and the particular kind of calm that comes from spending years sitting across conference tables from people in the worst chapters of their lives. She shook my hand at the door and said, simply, "Take me through whatever you're comfortable sharing. In whatever order makes sense." Paul was at work. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had told me about Amber, where he had set his keys down that first night, like he was testing whether they still worked. Catherine opened a legal pad and looked at me and said, "Start wherever you need to. Don't leave out the financial parts, even the ones that feel minor." I talked for nearly 2 hours. Catherine took 6 pages of notes. Faye sat beside me and said almost nothing, which told me this was not an exploratory meeting. Faye had already given Catherine the framework. They were here to confirm my version matched what they already knew. When I finished, Catherine set down her pen and said, "Here is what matters under Ontario's Family Law Act. When a married couple separates, the court equalizes what are called net family properties. Not an automatic 50-50 split of everything, but an equalization of what each spouse accumulated during the marriage. The income from your business during your marriage is part of your net family property calculation. It counts. The loans from Doris, if they cannot be substantiated as genuine debts through proper documentation, may be characterized as gifts, which means they likely cannot be claimed as a debt against the marital estate. She has a binder, I said. With interest, she calculated herself that she never told me about. Catherine nodded. A personal handwritten ledger with no counter-signature from you as his legal spouse, and no formal promissory note or loan agreement on record anywhere. That's a document someone made to track a private arrangement. A family court judge will want to see a signed, witnessed agreement. Barring that, the position that Paul owes his mother, $61,000, becomes very difficult to establish. I looked at Faye. She looked back at me with an expression I recognized from when she was 16 and had worked out something several steps ahead of where I was standing. We need to verify there's nothing formal on file anywhere, I said. We don't need to find the binder, Catherine said. We request records. If no formal loan agreement exists in any bank record or legal filing, and I expect strongly that none does, then the argument that this constitutes marital debt is starting from almost no ground. The word separation settled into the air between the three of us. I watched it land. I've been married 14 years, I said. I know, Catherine said. She said it without softening it unnecessarily, which I appreciated more than I could have expressed in that moment. Your business income is consistent and documented. Your contributions to this household are real and traceable. Ontario courts look at the full picture of what each person brought to the marriage, including contributions that aren't strictly financial. None of what you've described here is invisible. I sat with that for a moment. What do I do first? I said. Catherine picked up her pen. First, pull together whatever business records you have, e-transfer records, invoices, anything you can find. Second, stay in the house. Under Family Law Act, the matrimonial home has specific protections for both spouses. Do not leave under any circumstances. Third, give me the go-ahead to start the paperwork with a lawyer at my firm. That evening, Paul came home to find Faye at the kitchen table eating leftover soup and me at the stove heating more. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from Faye to me and back. Hey, he said carefully, I didn't know you were coming up. Surprise, Faye said pleasantly, and went back to her bowl. Paul sat down, and the three of us ate together in a careful, suspended quiet that had its own specific texture. Not hostile, not peaceful, just held. Paul told a story about something that had happened on the highway going north. Faye asked a follow-up question with the polished attentiveness of someone who had decided to be entirely unremarkable. I refilled my water glass twice and said almost nothing, and watched my husband not notice that everything had already shifted. The application for separation was filed the following Wednesday. Paul was served at his office in Barrie. Neutral ground. Catherine had advised no scene, no opportunity for anything to become a problem at home or in front of our neighbors. He called me 22 minutes after it happened. Sylvia. Just my name. And the quality of it, stripped down, unguarded, like a man who has believed the walls are permanent and has just watched one come down. Told me more than any word he could have added. I know, I said. We could have talked about this. We have been talking for 14 years, Paul. I talked. You decided. There is a difference. A long silence. Is this because of Amber? I thought about that, honestly. I genuinely considered it the way I do when I want to be accurate. No, I said finally. Amber is the part that was visible. This is about every time you borrowed money from your mother without telling me. Every time I said something mattered to me and you looked at me like I was creating work for you. Every February Saturday I was at that market at 7 in the morning, because our former joint account was $400 from where it couldn't go. Every time Doris wrote something in that binder and you let her, and every time you came home and put your keys on the counter and assumed that was enough. Amber is the last chapter. She is not the book. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice had something quieter in it, something close to the ground. Mum's going to. I know what Doris is going to do, I said. She is going to try to claim $61,000 as a marital debt. And she is going to find out that a handwritten ledger she kept at her own kitchen table in Bracebridge is not a legally binding instrument. Catherine has already confirmed there is no formal documentation on file. Not with any bank, not in any court record. Nothing notarized, nothing witnessed, nothing signed by me. The silence that followed was the longest one we'd had in 14 years of marriage. "How do you know about the binder?" he said finally. "Faye saw it 2 Christmases ago. She was waiting for me to be ready to hear it." I heard him exhale. Long and slow, the sound of a man releasing something he had been holding for longer than he knew. "I didn't know it was that much," he said quietly. And I believed him. That was the hardest part. I believed him completely. Doris had kept him just informed enough to feel obligated, and just uninformed enough that he never sat down and added it all up. She had managed the debt the way you manage the temperature in a room, small adjustments, nothing sudden, nothing dramatic enough to notice until the chill has been there so long it starts to feel like normal air. And he had let her do that for 14 years. He had let her, and I had been the one absorbing the cost of that arrangement in ways I was only now beginning to calculate. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's not mine to carry anymore." The confrontation with Doris came 3 weeks later, without planning. She drove down from Bracebridge on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of filling a large shortbread order for a corporate client in Halliburton. I heard her car pull in. I heard the front door open. She had a key, had always had a key, had never once knocked before using it. I set down my piping bag and walked to the kitchen. She was standing in the middle of the room with her handbag held in both hands, silver hair precisely cut, 5 feet and 2 inches of composed fury. "You filed," she said. "I did. After everything this family has done for you." I pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, which I could see surprised her. She had expected me to stand, to manage her, to handle her the way I always had. "Doris," I said, "sit down if you'd like." She didn't move. "Your choice," I said. "Here is what is going to happen. Catherine Wende, who is a licensed paralegal at a family law firm in Toronto, has already filed a records request for any formal loan documentation between you and Paul. There isn't any, which means the $61,000 in that binder of yours is going to be characterized in our separation proceedings as a series of undocumented gifts from a parent to an adult child. Not debt, not a legal claim against the marital estate. Gifts." Something moved behind her eyes. "Those were loans." He signed papers. He signed notes you wrote yourself at your kitchen table in Bracebridge, with interest you calculated on your own, with no witness, no notary, and no disclosure to me as his legal spouse. If you want to bring that into a courtroom, Doris, you go right ahead. I will be sitting right there." She gripped her handbag. "I was trying to help my son." "You were trying to keep your son," I said, and my voice came out steady and level, the way the mixer sounds at full speed. No variation, no waver. "There is a difference. You kept him feeling like he owed you something his entire adult life. You kept him coming back to you for money so that he would have to keep coming back to you for permission. And I was the wife who held this household together, while the two of you worked out that arrangement between yourselves without telling me. I did market Saturdays in -15. I delivered meal prep when the roads in the county were bad because I couldn't afford to cancel the orders. I kept the mortgage current through 2 slow quarters at Paul's firm. I did it with my hands and my kitchen and that mixer, and not once, not a single time, did you treat any of that as something that counted. Doris's jaw was tight. You should have been grateful for the support. I was grateful, I said. I was also 38 years old, carrying more than my share for 14 years, and tired in a way I hadn't let myself name. Both of those things were true at the same time. She left 10 minutes later without another word. The front door closed behind her with a precise, deliberate click that said everything she hadn't. The separation took 9 months to finalize. Paul did not contest it in the way I had steeled myself for. I think, in the end, he was simply tired. Tired of the arithmetic of trying to be 2 things at once. Tired of the version of himself that had grown from years of managed obligations and convenient decisions. Tired of the distance between who he had meant to be and what he had actually built. The house sold in the spring. The proceeds were divided according to the equalization of our net family properties, exactly as Catherine and the family lawyer had mapped out from the beginning. The $61,000 Doris had recorded in her binder, without a single piece of documentation that could survive scrutiny, carried no weight in the proceedings. As it turned out, a ledger's is not a contract. A handwritten note is not a promissory note. A number a woman wrote in her own kitchen, with interest she assigned herself, witnessed by no one and disclosed to no one, is not a legal debt. I kept the KitchenAid. Paul did not argue the point. 6 months after I signed the final papers, I signed a commercial lease on a small unit in a building on the main road through Minden. Real kitchen, proper ventilation hood, a prep space large enough to take event orders I had been turning down for 3 years. I put Sylvia's table on the door in hand-cut vinyl letters that I pressed on myself on a Tuesday morning in October, the maples already orange above the lake road. The first order I filled in the new space was butter tarts for the same Halliburton family who had been ordering from me since August, 36 of them. Same as always. Some things you build quietly, over a long time, before you fully understand what you are building. Paul spent 14 years constructing arrangements he believed were permanent, debts and habits, and a particular kind of inertia that he had let his mother help him maintain. He never stopped to check whether I was building something too. Something in my own name, with my own hands, that would still be standing when everything else had been divided and settled and set aside. He was wrong about a lot of things. That one he never saw coming.